It started with a single woman. On a hot July morning in 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, she stepped into the street and began to dance. There was no music, no festival, no reason. She simply danced. At first, people laughed. Then they stared. Then they grew afraid. Because she didn't stop. Hours passed. Then days. Her feet bled. Her body shook. Her face went blank, lost in some invisible rhythm only she could hear. But she was just the beginning. Within a week, dozens joined her. By the end of the month, there were hundreds. Men, women, children, all dancing, all unable to stop. And then, one by one, they began to collapse. Twitching, screaming, dying. Their hearts exploded. Their bodies overheated. Their minds snapped. The city descended into chaos. Priests blamed demons, doctors blamed blood, and survivors whispered of curses older than Christ. This wasn't mass hysteria. This was something ancient, something buried, a madness that danced through time and may not be gone. Because what really happened in Strasbourg is more disturbing than anyone ever imagined, and it's never been fully explained. The summer of 1518 in Strasbourg was oppressively hot. The air was thick with humidity, the Rhine River sluggish under the weight of heat. Crops had failed earlier that year, and whispers of famine stirred behind closed doors. Death lingered in the streets, not as a shadow, but as a routine visitor. This was a world already on the edge. And then she began to dance. Historical records never recorded her name. Some call her Frau Trophia, others simply the dancing woman. But her footsteps echo louder than most kings. She emerged from her home like any ordinary citizen. No trumpet, no attention, just a single woman in the street, moving to a rhythm only she could hear. Witnesses say she twitched at first, jerky, sudden movements. Then she spun, flailed, and stomped her feet in a frenzied loop. She didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't stop. For 6 hours, she danced. Then 12, then 24. Neighbors offered food. She refused. Others tried to restrain her. She broke free. Priest came. She kept dancing. For 6 full days, she danced until her legs gave out beneath her. And even then, she crawled, swaying and convulsing. By the end of the week, 30 more had joined her. Not for fun, not for art, but because they couldn't help it. Their limbs jerked uncontrollably. Their eyes rolled back. Some screamed while they danced. Others wept. Their bodies acted like puppets, yanked by invisible strings. Soon, the city square was filled with dancers, some barefoot, some bleeding, many foaming at the mouth. A strange music seemed to pulse through them, though no sound could be heard. Authorities panicked. The city council was torn. Doctors diagnosed it as hot blood. Priests saw it as divine punishment. Some believed it was the curse of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of epileptics and dancers. Others whispered darker names, pagan gods long buried, now risen. But the horror had just begun. Because people didn't just collapse from exhaustion. They died. Their feet burst open with blisters, raw flesh peeling from the bone. Others succumbed to heart attacks, strokes, and sheer physical collapse. And yet, the dancing continued. A 16th century plague, not of the body, but of the mind, spirit, and perhaps something more. Something unseen. One account describes a child convulsing so violently while dancing that his spine snapped. Another tells of a mother who danced into the river and drowned, smiling. The city fell into silence, watching its people move like marionettes toward death. But instead of quarantining the dancers or shutting down public life, the city did something unthinkable. They built a stage. They hired musicians. And they encouraged the dancers to keep going. Why? That answer lies in part 2, where panic, politics, and belief collided in the most chilling way imaginable. It should have stopped. That's what everyone thought. This was 1518, an age of superstition, yes, but also of tightening medical theories and state control. When a disease struck, you isolated the sick. When madness spread, you locked the doors and lit the incense. But Strasbourg chose the opposite. They built a stage. Yes, a literal wooden platform, right in the center of the city square. The authorities believed that the dancers, afflicted as they were, needed to dance it out. Their logic was rooted in the theory of overheated blood. According to the city's top physicians, these people weren't cursed or possessed. They were simply overwhelmed by internal heat. Too much bile, Too much blood, boiling their minds into motion. And the only cure was more dancing. So the city hired musicians, drummers, pipers, lute players. They were ordered to play, not for joy, but to guide the dancers into exhaustion. As if death could be orchestrated. The platform was meant to contain them, but it only drew more. Crowds gathered to watch the possessed sway and scream under the sun. Some came out of horror, others curiosity. A few even joined in, drawn in by something primal. It's said that in the second week, the square echoed with unholy rhythms, not from the musicians, but from the shuffle of hundreds of feet. A heartbeat made of panic, and the deaths kept piling up. No one knows how many perished. Estimates range from dozens to hundreds. The city's records are vague, perhaps deliberately so. But we know this. People collapsed mid-motion. Their legs snapped beneath them. Some bit off their own tongues. Others danced straight into walls until their skulls fractured. Still, the musicians played. Still, the council waited. And then came the blood priest. He didn't wear the robes of the church. He came not with doctrine, but with ritual. A self-proclaimed holy man, robed in red, claiming he had seen this before. He told of a similar plague, long forgotten, hidden in the forested edges of the Alps. He spoke of a dance older than Christ, tied to pagan gods that demanded movement as sacrifice. His solution? Build a temple, not of stone, but of rhythm. Offer the dancers to the old gods in ceremonial fashion. Let the madness complete its cycle. Some say he was a fraud. Others say he was a prophet. But the council, desperate and terrified, gave him permission. He gathered the worst afflicted and led them to a small chapel outside the city. He ordered prayers in dead languages. He burned herbs until the air turned thick and choking. Then he performed ritual dances, not unlike those in the street, but slower, more deliberate, choreographed like a summoning. That's when the dancing began again. But now, it wasn't just the victims. The priests joined in. The guards. The onlookers. The madness had metastasized. It had learned the path into belief. The blood priest didn't stop them. He welcomed it. In his journal, he wrote, "They must give in. Resistance is where the death hides. If they surrender, they may live." But surrender to what? No one could say. Within days, the madness reached the surrounding villages. Farmers began dancing in their fields until they collapsed. A pregnant woman was found mid-labor, still spinning in the dirt. Children were discovered swaying alone in forests, barefoot and humming. It was no longer a medical anomaly. It was a plague of ritual. The city's leaders panicked. The stage was dismantled. The music silenced. The blood priest vanished. Some say he was executed. Others believe he became part of something darker, something still moving. But it was too late. What started with one woman had now spread to hundreds of lives across the region. No one knew what would happen next. But a new theory was forming, one that pointed not to science, not to God, but to an ancient force buried deep beneath human memory. One that used dance as a key to open something horrific. And what they found is revealed in part 3. By the third month, Strasbourg wasn't just afflicted. It was unraveling. The streets no longer echoed with cartwheels and bells, but with moans, gasps, and the constant shuffle of feet. Homes stood empty. Markets were abandoned. Schools and churches locked their doors. But still they danced. Not just in the square, but in alleyways, in courtyards, even inside homes. Entire families were found dead, their hands still clutched together mid-spin. Dancers were now starving to death while moving. Muscles tore, bones snapped, and eyes bulged from sockets. But they could not stop. Could not. Those who remained unaffected became desperate. Doctors prescribed anything they could imagine. Leeches, cold baths, bleeding, even trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to let the fire escape. Nothing worked. Then came the priests. Incense burned day and night. Exorcisms were performed en masse. In one cathedral, a bishop stood before a dozen dancers, chanting in Latin as they screamed in tongues. But nothing broke the spell. Some priests began to whisper of Saint Vitus, the patron of dancers and epileptics. In medieval lore, Vitus had the power to both cause and cure uncontrollable movements. They believed the plague was his curse, or worse, a divine punishment. So a plan was hatched. The afflicted would be taken, by force, to St. Vitus's shrine, located deep in the Vosges Mountains. They were dragged there by wagon, their limbs twitching all the while. At the shrine, barefoot and broken, they were made to kneel, confess, and walk in circles around the altar until they collapsed. Their shoes were burned. Their feet were washed in holy water mixed with ash. It was a ritual of cleansing through submission. Some were cured, or at least they stopped dancing. But others, many others, died at the shrine, foaming at the mouth, their bodies writhing in impossible ways. Witnesses claimed the deaths were not peaceful, but explosive, hearts rupturing, spines snapping. One man bit through his own wrist trying to stop himself. The plague had become a crucible, separating body from soul. The authorities panicked. The council considered martial law. The bishop begged for mass repentance. The surviving citizens, unable to make sense of the madness, began lashing out. Witch trials flared up. Any woman seen dancing, even for joy, was accused. Midwives, herbalists, and healers were dragged into the street and burned. One was said to have cursed the city with his spell of rhythm. She was buried alive with her hands tied in prayer position. But the plague did not discriminate. It claimed the rich, the poor, the pious, the criminal. It ignored the crosses. It laughed at the flames. The turning point came when the executioners began to dance. The men hired to purge the afflicted were suddenly seen swaying in their own homes, twitching while sharpening blades. One was found spinning in the town square at dawn, weeping uncontrollably. His blood-soaked axe sat beside him. He was the first to speak the phrase that would become legend. "It's not me moving. Something else is pulling." Whispers spread of an unseen force, a parasite of the soul, a possession without a possessor. That's when the archives begin to go silent. City records abruptly end for several weeks. Letters stop mid-sentence. Journals turn into frenzied scribbles. It's as if the city itself fell into a blackout of the mind. Modern historians would later refer to this period as the dark spiral. And then it stopped. Just like that. By late September, the dancing faded. No explanation. No miracle. Just silence. The survivors awoke confused, terrified, and bruised. Some couldn't remember anything. Others remembered everything and never spoke again. But what haunted Strasbourg wasn't just what happened, it was the aftermath. Because the dancers who lived changed. They walked differently, avoided music, refused to attend church or festivals. Some claimed to hear a beat in their heads, a drum that never stopped. One woman gouged out her own ears during a mass. And most chilling of all, a small group of survivors began gathering in secret. They called themselves the Sway. They believed the dancing had opened a gateway, that what they had experienced wasn't a disease, but a summoning. They had seen something, felt something, and they weren't trying to forget. They were trying to bring it back. But what were they summoning? In Part 4, we trace the ritual back to its ancient, pagan roots and uncover a dark doctrine long buried by time. The history books call it a mystery, a plague of unknown origin, a strange, collective madness. But it wasn't the first time people danced themselves to death. It just happened to be the most visible. Centuries before Strasbourg, in remote corners of Europe, older stories circulated, barely recorded, mostly whispered. Oral traditions from pagan forests, passed down in folklore, buried under Christian dogma. And at the heart of them all was a name. One that Strasbourg survivors would later mutter in sleep, scrawl into walls, and etch into wood. Radames. There is no official record of such a deity. But piecing together scattered fragments, monastic denunciations, folk songs, forbidden scrolls, reveals an entity described in tones of both awe and horror. Radames was said to be the god of rhythm and rupture. Not music, not joy, but rhythm as force, as compulsion. Worshippers didn't sing to him. They moved, danced, twirled in sacred circles until they vomited, collapsed, sometimes until they bled out. In these ancient rites, movement was sacrifice, each step a prayer, each spin a surrender. His earliest cult, the Canticulum Mortis, the Song of Death, existed in Proto-Germanic and Celtic territories. Archaeologists have found ring-shaped ritual sites, with strange carvings of human figures bent backward, arms extended unnaturally, locked in poses of ecstatic torment. In a cave in Austria, red ochre symbols depict human forms encircling a central eye, surrounded by jagged lines representing motion. Beneath them, skeletons arranged in a spiral. Carbon dating places the site around 900 BCE. One of the symbols, eerily similar to a musical staff, is later echoed in Strasbourg's cathedral, hidden behind the main altar. A monk's journal from 1412 describes it as a mark of pagan disobedience, buried so God may not see. But someone remembered. Someone kept the knowledge alive. The Sway. That secret group of Strasbourg survivors who gathered in candlelit cellars, their feet bare, their bodies trembling. At first, people thought they were traumatized, cursed. But others began to notice a pattern. They were always near when new cases emerged. They were often found sketching circular diagrams in the dirt. And when the rhythm returned, briefly, for one day in 1526, it began in the cellar of a bakery owned by a known Sway member. That day, 8 people danced until death, with no music. The city executed the baker, burned his home, sealed the cellar with iron and salt. But the movement didn't stop. It relocated. Reports began surfacing in Switzerland, then Italy, even as far as northern Africa. Each outbreak was short, brutal, and shrouded in silence, as if someone was trying to cover them up. One 16th-century Venetian doctor described a patient who danced continuously for 6 days. When restrained, she screamed, "The drum is coming from inside my bones." Another report from a Polish village tells of a girl who collapsed mid-spin, and whose heart was still pulsing to a rhythm 10 minutes after death. But what was this rhythm? Modern neurologists have speculated about auditory hallucinations or mass hysteria. But in 1973, a researcher studying historical trance states discovered something chilling. When he mapped the locations of 14 recorded dancing outbreaks between 1200 and 1600, they formed a pattern, a spiral, radiating outward from Strasbourg. And at its center, a monastery that no longer exists. The Abbey of St. Cunegund, burned in 1599. Its only surviving artifact? A single sheet of handwritten music, now housed in a museum in Basel. The title reads, Cantus Spiralis, the Spiral Song. It is unplayable. The notation system used is unknown, the melody incoherent. But when scanned and digitally analyzed in 2009, it revealed repeating frequency patterns almost identical to modern-day binaural beat therapy. Which means the music may not have been meant for the ears, but for the brain. The dance may not have been a symptom. It may have been a response to a sonic key, a key passed down in secret by the Sway, a key used to invoke Radamas. And what happens when that key is turned? The survivors knew. That's why they feared music, why they moved only in silence, why they buried their own dead in spiral pits, away from consecrated ground. Because once opened, the rhythm does not leave. It waits. In the next and final part, we explore the aftermath, why modern governments may still be hiding outbreaks, and why music festivals might unknowingly echo an ancient ritual that should have stayed buried. The Strasbourg outbreak of 1518 officially ended in late September. The city claimed success. The priests declared it an act of spiritual intervention. The dead were buried, the rest forgotten. But that was a lie. Behind closed doors, authorities knew the dancing plague never truly ended. In the weeks following the final deaths, several survivors vanished, without burial, without notice. Entire families who had witnessed the dancing were relocated, their homes cleansed with salt and lye. One chronicler, writing anonymously, said, "It was not dancing, it was feeding. And the rhythm is not ours. It waits for warm feet and open minds." But what if it's still feeding? Let's follow the threads forward. In 1848, in a village near the Black Forest, a group of schoolchildren began spinning in circles during prayer. Their limbs jerked involuntarily. One child died of a brain hemorrhage. It was labeled a fit. In 1912, during a pagan folk festival in Estonia, 3 women collapsed after dancing around a bonfire. Witnesses say their bodies continued twitching in sync for over 30 minutes. A priest present at the scene called it a rhythm without a drummer. And in 1969, during the height of the counterculture movement, a mass gathering in the French countryside, called the Rebirth Spiral, ended in dozens hospitalized for seizures and psychotic breaks. They'd been part of an experimental music and trance session led by an esoteric group called Children of the Spiral. The music they played was unlike anything heard before, atonal, looping, with no discernible beat, and yet, hundreds danced to it for over 17 hours. Their logo? A stylized eye inside a spiral. The same ancient symbol found etched on the stone near Strasbourg's plague house. Coincidence? Or continuity? And what if it's not isolated? Today, we pride ourselves on rationalism. We call mass hysteria a trick of the brain. We explain strange behavior with chemicals and trauma. But what if those explanations are just modern masks for ancient truths? Radamas, if such a force ever existed, may not have been a god in the divine sense, but perhaps the conscious rhythm. Something older than language, older than civilization. A pattern embedded in the electrical architecture of the human brain, waiting for the right frequency to awaken. It sounds absurd until you consider what music does to us. It synchronizes heartbeats, alters perception, manipulates emotion without a single word. Some frequencies can even influence brain waves, induce sleep, trigger panic. And now, with algorithms optimizing sound for dopamine release, and music festivals drawing hundreds of thousands into shared, rhythmic euphoria. What if we're unknowingly recreating the conditions for mass rhythmic collapse? What if it doesn't take a god, just the perfect pattern? In 2022, an underground artist released a track online said to have been constructed using forbidden scales and spiral harmonics. Listeners reported dizziness, nausea, compulsion to move. The video was taken down. The artist? Gone. His last online message was a string of repeating phrases. It's in the rhythm. The spiral spins again. We were never meant to hear this. That same year, a private security memo leaked from an international EDM festival described a contained panic event where 43 attendees began seizing and moving in sync, despite no music playing. Official statements blamed heat exhaustion. But the footage, briefly uploaded before deletion, showed something far stranger. No panic. Just smiling faces. And dancing. So where does this leave us? The plague of 1518 was real. But perhaps it wasn't a plague. Perhaps it was a reawakening. A brief resurgence of something humanity once knew, feared, and then forgot. Or tried to forget. Because it wasn't the first time. And according to scattered whispers, it won't be the last. The sway is gone. The cult of Radamas is buried in stone and forgotten names. But the rhythm? The rhythm is patient. It does not demand belief, only movement. So next time your foot taps without thinking, next time a beat gets stuck in your head and won't leave, ask yourself, who's really dancing? And more importantly, who's leading? The story of the dancing plague isn't just a medical mystery. It's a mirror, reflecting what happens when belief, fear, and something deeper, darker than we understand take hold of our minds and bodies. Was it mass hysteria? A repressed cult ritual? Or a forgotten frequency that still haunts our neural pathways? Whatever it was, it left behind bodies and questions. If this story disturbed you, intrigued you, or kept you up tonight, hit that subscribe button. We dive deep into the weirdest, darkest, most mind-blowing true stories that history tried to bury. Leave a comment below. Do you think the rhythm was real? Or just another ghost in our past? And if you want more stories like this, tales of madness, mystery, and historical horror, watch the next video on screen now. Until then, keep your feet still, and don't listen too closely.